Thank you for that, Senator. Let's try it one more time. Good morning. Good to see everybody. The hour of convening has arrived, and the Senate will now come to order. This time I would ask that all unauthorized persons exit our beautiful chamber. Chair recognizes the distinguished, well-rested Senator from Chickamauga.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure about well-rested, but I'm glad to be here with you, and thank you for your leadership, and glad to be here with my fellow senators that are here. Moment in time, 1940, baseball is televised for the very first time, and the rest is history. Also, the senator from the 7th, who isn't here, told me it was National Tooth Fairy Day, one of his favorite days. Senator from the 9th says it's National Cupcake Day, and it's Ryan Comfort's birthday. He works with us in my office. He's a fine young man. Or as my mom would say, he's a good boy. Mr. President, the journal's been read and found to be correct.
I've grown accustomed to Monday morning updates on the herd of cattle resting in your front pasture. Is there any updates to the cattle? Thank you for that update. Is there objection to dispensing with the reading of the journal? The chair hears none, and the reading of the journal is dispensed with. Are there any motions to reconsider? Are there any motions to reconsider? The chair sees none. Is there objection to confirmation of the journal? The chair hears none, and the journal is confirmed. All senators who have bills and resolutions, please bring them to the secretary's desk at this time. Mr. Secretary, first reading a reference of Senate bills and resolutions, please.
Senate Bill 553 by Senators Robertson of the 29th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 52 of the OCGA relating to general provisions of registration, operation, and sale of
Natural resources.
Senate Bill 554 by Senator Tiller of the 19th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act providing for the election of the members of the Truton County Board of Education.
State and local government.
Senate Bill 555 by Senator Tiller of the 19th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act creating the Board of Commissioners of Truton County approved March 12, 1935.
State and local government.
Senate Bill 556 by Senators Thompson of the 14th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 5 of Title 40 of the OCGA relating to insurance, expiration, and renewal of driver's licenses.
Public safety.
Senate Bill 557 by Senators Thompson of the 14th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 4 of Title 49 of the OCGA relating to general provisions for public assistance so as to increase
insurance and labor.
Senate Bill 558 by Senators Gooch of the 51st and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 32 of the OCGA relating to Department of Transportation so as to amend notice provisions.
Transportation.
Senate Bill 559 by Senator Burns of the 23rd, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act creating a new charter for the city of Thompson, approved March 15,
Slow go.
Senate Bill 560 by Senators Jones of the 10th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend an act to create and establish in DeKalb County, Georgia, districts from which the members of the county...
Slow
go. Senate Bill 561 by Senator Thompson of the 14th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 43 of the OCGA relating to professions and businesses so as to change certain provisions.
Regulated industries.
Senate Bill 562 by Senators Mullis of the 53rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 3 of Chapter 5 of Title 50 of the OCGA relating to general authority
Government
duties.
oversight.
Senate Bill 563 by Senators Merritt of the 9th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 14 of Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to other educational programs under the Quality Basic...
Education and youth.
Senate Bill 564 by Senators Merritt of the 9th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 8 of Chapter 1 of Title 10 of the OCGA relating to petroleum products so as to require certain security measures on gasoline pumps.
Science and technology.
Senate Bill 565 by Senator Strickland of the 17th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 10 of Title 17 of the OCGA relating to procedure for sentencing and imposition of punishment so as to provide...
Judiciary.
Senate Resolution 564 by Senators Rahman of the 5th and others, a resolution amending the rules of the Senate and for other purposes.
Rules.
Senate Resolution 565 by Senators Anna Vitarte of the 31st and others, a resolution designating the Northwest Georgia Logistics Corridor as an official logistics growth corridor in Georgia and for other purposes.
Transportation.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
First reading and reference of House bills and resolutions, please. Oh, speed ahead here. Ms. Secretary, will you please read a communication from the governor for us?
Mr. President, the Senate has received the following communication from the governor. Dear Secretary Cook, attached is a list of appointments to various boards, commissions, authorities, and other entities requiring Senate confirmation. These appointments were made after January 13, 2022, the submission of the previous list. This list is submitted pursuant to Senate Rules 3-3.1. If we can provide you with any additional information to assist your office in the confirmation process, please let us know. Thank you for your assistance. Sincerely, Brian Kemp, Governor. The list of appointments is attached and have been placed on your desk. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, and the list of appointments have been referred to the Committee on Assignments, and there is a copy of those on your desk, as mentioned. First reading and reference of House bills and resolutions, please.
House Bill 896 by Representatives Crow of the 110th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 48540 of the OCGA relating to definitions for property tax exemption so as to update the population bracket and census date for a certain property tax exemption for relief.
Finance.
House Bill 1008 by Representatives Hawkins of the 27th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 11 of Chapter 3 of Title 20 and Chapter 9 of Title 30 of the OCGA relating to the Higher Education Savings Plan and Georgia Achieving a Better Life Experience.
Banking and financial institutions.
House Bill 1059 by Representatives Gamble of the 15th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 24 of Title 33 of the OCGA relating to insurance generally so as to provide exclusions to unfair trade practices and
Insurance and labor.
House Bill 1088 by Representatives Gunter of the 8th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 7 of Article 5 of Chapter 3 of Title 44 of the OCGA relating to miscellaneous provisions regarding timeshare projects and programs so as to authorize
Judiciary.
House Bill 1186 by Representatives Houston of the 170th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 44 of Title 43 of the OCGA relating to state speech language pathology and audiology.
Health and Human Services.
House Bill 1215 by Representatives Thomas of the 21st and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 22-2089 of the OCGA relating to
Education and Youth.
House Bill 1217 by Representatives Irwin of the 28th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 6 of Chapter 2 of Title 20 of the OCGA relating to Quality Basic Education Act so as to provide for the inclusion of methods.
Science and Technology.
House Bill 1233 by Representatives Rhodes of the 120th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 2 of Title 12 of Title 27 and Article 1 of Chapter 7 of Title 52 of the OCGA relating to general provisions of the Department of Natural Resources.
Natural Resources.
House Bill 1276 by Representatives Hawkins of the 27th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 2 of Title 31 of the OCGA relating to the Department of the Community Health so as to require that statistical
Insurance and
reports.
labor.
House Bill 1307 by Representative Houston of the 170th, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 25 of the OCGA relating to fire protection and safety so as to revise the Georgia Utility Facility Protection Act.
Public Safety.
House Bill 1320 by Representatives Knight of the 130th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 48 of the OCGA relating to revenue and taxation so as to revise the terms Internal Revenue Code and
Finance.
That completes the order, Mr. President.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read reports of standing committees?
Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 486 do pass. Senate Bill 371 do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Walker of the 20th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Appropriations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. House Bill 910 substitute do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Tillery of the 19th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Regulated Industries and Utilities has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 529 do pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Cowser of the 46th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations has had under consideration the following legislation and has instructed me to report the same back to the Senate with the following recommendation. Senate Bill 546 do pass. Senate Bill 547 do pass. Senate Bill 548 do pass. Senate Bill 549 do pass. House Bill 1312 do pass. House Bill 1340 do pass. House Bill 1341 do pass. House Bill 1365 do pass. House Bill 1367 do pass. House Bill 1368 do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Anderson of the 24th District Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President. Mr.
Secretary, can you please read bills and resolutions for the second time?
Senate Bill 345 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, state and local governments from mandating vaccine passports prohibit. Senate Bill 378 by Senator Albers of the 56th and others, reckless conduct, definition of hazing, expand. Senate Bill 493 by Senator Mullis of the 53rd and others, timeshare projects and programs, non-judicial foreclosure of timeshare estates, authorize. Senate Bill 496 by Senator Burke of the 11th and others, death investigations, medical examiner's inquiry when a pregnant female dies and an inquest require. Senate Bill 500 by Senator Strickland of the 17th and others, commerce, a litigation bar on governmental entities regarding certain statewide opioid litigation, provide. Senate Bill 511 by Senator Anderson of the 24th and others, county boards of equalization, handling of appeals of property tax assessments, revise certain deadlines. Senate Bill 514 by Senator Dixon of the 45th and others, Unmasked Georgia Students Act, enact. House Bill 385 by Representative Blackman of the 146th and others, Teachers Retirement System of Georgia, employee beneficiaries, permit public school systems. House Bill 1011 by Representative Hogan of the 179th and others, motor vehicles, amber strobe lights, permitting requirements, exempt low-speed vehicles. House Bill 1361 by Representative Leverett of the 33rd, civil practice, Attorney General is to be served and heard in defense of all acts of the General Assembly when challenged in any court action, clarify. That completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, it's now time for a morning roll call. Are there any motions to excuse? The chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good morning, y'all. I hope everybody had a good weekend. I ask for unanimous consent to excuse the following senators for business outside the Capitol: 42, 15, 26, and 20.
Without objection, the senators from the 42nd, 15th, 26th, and 20th are excused. Are there any additional motions to excuse? Secretary will call the roll of senators. Signify your presence by voting the yea switch. The secretary will unlock the machine. All right, it's now time for a morning devotional, the best time of the day. All senators, take your seats. Cease all audible conversations. Doorkeepers, please prepare the chamber. Chair would like to recognize the distinguished senator from the 24th to lead us in our pledge and to introduce to us our chaplain of the day.
Let us pledge allegiance to the greatest flag in the world. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of the world, and to which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And our Georgia flag. I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag, to the principles of which it stands, wisdom, justice, moderation, courage. Good morning. It is truly an honor to be able to be here today to present to you the pastor today. Today we have a young man that I've known basically his whole life, Andy Collins, a gentleman that went to Augusta University, and also he went to Lutheran Rice, let me get it right, Lutheran Rice Seminary to get his master's. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that him accepting Jesus Christ was the most important thing he's ever done, and any of us have ever done. But the second most important thing he's ever did was to get this woman over here in the corner to say I do. Melissa, I've known her whole life. She's an educator in the Columbia County school system. They have two beautiful children, Andrew and Caleb. Also, you know, I could say a lot about what Andy's done, but what I really want to say is what their church does. He's a pastor at Sharon Baptist Church in Winfield, Georgia. But every year at Christmas, the whole church comes together at the fairgrounds and presents a live scene of the life of our Lord Jesus Christ. They have probably 10 or 15 tractors with trailers, with bleachers on the back of the trailers where people can come and view this awesome scene. It goes all the way from his birth, all the way to when he was on the old rugged cross to that empty tomb. But ladies and gentlemen, it's the whole church that comes together that makes that happen. And it's thousands of people from all over our area comes there every Christmas to see this. It's amazing. But at this time, I present to you Andy Collins.
Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, President Pro Tem Butch Miller, and my Senator Lee Anderson, and members of the Georgia State Senate, it is my privilege to lead you in devotion and then a time of prayer as you open your session. The Apostle Paul exhorted Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2 that supplication, prayers, intercession, and the giving of thanks be made for all men, but especially for kings and for those who are in authority. Therefore, senators, as I considered Paul's charge to Timothy and my time before you today, I was compelled to share with you this statement. Appointed leaders are accountable stewards. Appointed leaders are accountable stewards. In fact, because appointed leaders are accountable stewards, I want you to know that I commit to praying for you as you lead. See, first of all, I pray for you because you are appointed leaders of your home. It is true that here in this chamber, you are recognized by your titles, your appointments, the committees which you serve. But in your home, you are identified as mom and dad, husband and wife, the relationship that God has given you. See, in your home, you are stewards of children and grandchildren, those who bear your last name, and those who will vote for you because they are your biggest fan, even if they're not eligible to vote yet. Second, senators, I commit to praying for you because you are appointed leaders of this great state. You have been trusted with a great responsibility. Moments ago, you pledged the principles of wisdom, justice, moderation, and courage. And the decisions that you make will impact everywhere, from the courthouse to the schoolhouse. Senators, the legislation that you pass will impact every generation, 4 generations. Georgia's most vulnerable will be blessed or burdened by the votes that you cast. The principles of our great nation will be preserved or disregarded, and all of the biblical principles that we were founded upon will be remembered or forgotten. And that is why I want you to know that I commit to praying for you as the scriptures command. But senators, the greatest reason I pray for you is because appointed leaders are accountable stewards. And one day, every one of us will give an account before a holy God. See, I will give an account for this devotion. We will give an account for the way that we raised our family. And you will give an account for your leadership to this great state. But senators, you will not give an account to your peers, to your constituents, to the parties that you serve. Rather, you will give an account to the one who appointed you to this office. See, you will give an account to the one who created the heavens and the earth, the one who ordained family for his glory, the one who knits children together in their mother's womb, the one who grants wisdom to those who humbly ask. And I believe the one who sent his son Jesus to die for our sins. Therefore, senators, why do I pray for you? Because the scripture commands it. But why do I also pray for you? the members of Sharon Baptist Church, because we believe that appointed leaders are accountable stewards. In fact, in closing, I would like to share with you a personal story about a time that I was appointed to run a barbed wire fence. See, Senator Anderson, he gave his son and I clear instructions. Together, Ben and I worked all day. We ran a barbed wire fence just as we wanted, just as we thought was right. I was doing that, and Ben was doing that. But whenever Lee arrived, it was obvious that it was not like he wanted. And for the first time, we stepped back from that fence, and we realized that it was as jagged as a heartbeat. And there was nothing straight about that fence because I was doing what I wanted, and Ben was doing what he wanted. But the one who appointed us, Senator Anderson, he was not pleased, and he did not have kind words to say. See, listen, appointed leaders will be accountable stewards, and one day we will stand before a righteous judge. I pray that he says of me, and I pray that he says of you, well done, thy good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a few things, and I will put you in charge of many things. But one day we will give that account. Senators, can I lead you in a time of prayer, please? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity. God, I'm thankful that we live in the great state of Georgia, and I'm thankful that Georgia is a part of the United States of America. You have blessed us, and God, just to be real, we do not deserve your blessing. God, I pray for our leaders. God, you have appointed them. You make that very clear in your word. God, I pray that they are good stewards of their home. God, I pray for a hedge of protection to be placed around their children, their spouse, their loved ones, their grandchildren. God, I pray that because you're merciful and you're kind, that you will pour out your blessings upon them. God, I pray that these men and women before me, these senators, God, I pray that they are good stewards of the office that they hold. God, I pray that you give them wisdom. God, I pray that they are guided through your word. God, I pray that you provide them counsel that they need to make righteous decisions. Lord, I ask that you are exalted in this chamber. God, that you will not allow us to call evil good or good evil. Last, God, I desire to be a good steward of this time. And so I praise you for salvation that comes through your Son, Jesus. God, I pray that you will extend that mercy to every man, but especially our leadership. It is in Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Are there any unanimous consents? The chair sees none. Does any senator wish to rise on a point of personal privilege? You have it. Almost got there. Chair recognizes the senator from the 44th for a point of personal privilege. As a point of reference for the chamber, because of it being day 21, it is now moved from 5 minutes to 3 minutes allotment for points of personal privilege for the remainder of the session. Chair recognizes the senator from the 44th.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On this final day of Black History Month, we honor and reflect upon numerous contributions of African Americans in the United States and globally. Our story is full of tragedy and struggle and breaking barriers that achieve the most basic levels of dignity, respect, and success. But our story is also full of triumph. Black history is American history. African Americans have had a profound impact on shaping American culture, from art, music, and fashion to scholarship, medicine, politics, and sports. We are the soldiers, bravely defending America and the freedoms of others in countries around the world. We are educators, architects, inventors, and entrepreneurs. Even our food, which connects us to our African origins, has flourished this nation for generations. During Black History Month 2022, we speak the names of historian and founder of Negro History Week, now Black History Month, of Dr. Carter G. Woodson, author Bell Hooks, theologian and scholar Dr. Howard Thurman, actors Sidney Poitier and Ethel Waters, aviator Bessie Coleman, Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, entrepreneur, television, and radio personality Kathy Hughes, Grand Slam title winner Theo Gibson, and home run king, the hammering Hank Aaron, photographer Gordon Parks, educator Selena Sloan Butler, Georgia's own civil rights icon Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Congressman John Lewis, contralto Marian Anderson, politician, lawyer, and voting rights activist Stacey Abrams, international civil rights and social justice leader, and my mentor who I marched with for years, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, and countless others, all moving us forward. We acknowledge the achievement of change makers, past and present, but we also understand Black history is about the lives and shared experience of all African Americans and the many ways in which we continue to strengthen America. As we continue to navigate through these unprecedented times, African Americans are reminded of our unbreakable spirit, our relentless faith, and our unwavering commitment to achieve the dream of life, liberty, equal rights, and justice for all. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. The chair recognizes the senator from the 14th with a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to recognize a family and a tragedy that happened in Gwinnett County. Many of you know my son attends Riverside Military School. What a great, great academy over in the Gainesville area. And last week, unfortunately, one of his colleagues, 15-year-old Alexandra Postel, in a domestic dispute at the home. Both he and his mother were shot and killed. So, Mr. President, I ask for a moment of silence for this family.
Senators asked us to rise for a moment of silence.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 5th with a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise today because even though we had disagree and vote differently on many issues, I know that I have many friends in this chamber. And I know that many of us disagree on policy. We're united in our attitude towards decency, towards respect. And so I ask for your support on a resolution, SR 564, which is a change to the rules for this body. There was a time when I don't think any of us would have thought this change was necessary. There was a time when the rights of local delegation were respected. They had the ability to make decisions that affected only their constituents and to pass legislation that only related to districts and elections in their counties and municipalities was left up to them. This is as it should be. But we see that trusting the process and the precedent is not enough. I propose a resolution to prevent the voter disenfranchisement and abuse of power we have seen this legislative session, in which the majority party has overridden the will of local legislators and voters when it comes to county commission and school board. My resolution would require local legislation to be approved by a majority of the local county or city delegation before it can be passed. This is ultimately about democracy. We can allow the Senate as a whole or broadly interfere with the local decisions that are rightly made by those the people elected to govern. When state legislators from other counties are interfering in school board election, such as in Gwinnett County, instead of letting the local elected officials do their job, that is a voter suppression. Every member of Georgia House and Senate should support rules that prevent this kind of overreach. It's time to put a stop in this abuse of the state Senate rule and change them to reflect the process as it was intended to work. Otherwise, it could be your county, your constituency, who are targeted next. So in the name of decency and respect, and in the name of democracy, I ask that you vote yes on this resolution when it comes to the floor. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the way.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 8th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to make this short and sweet. I was really disturbed over this past week when a video came out of a group of Americans that were chanting Putin and Russia. I can't tell you how much that disturbed me. My dad served with the 101st Division Airborne in Vietnam. There were 58,000 American soldiers that came home with that flag draped across a coffin, and those Americans might have died. The Vietnamese may have been the ones doing the shooting, but it was with Russian-supplied arms and armaments. And right now, we have Russia with tactical nuclear weapons pointed at the United States, and they have raised that threat awareness to high alert. And it is unfathomable to me that any American that calls himself an American with what's going on in the world today can chant Putin and Russia. Anyone that gives aid and comfort to the enemy like that, I'm going to tell you something. They are not deserving of the title to be called an American. Mr. President, I yield the will.
The chair would like to follow up those comments as a point of personal privilege and use very direct words that Vladimir Putin is a selfish, brutal dictator, and anybody who would tell you otherwise is lying. I call on this country, I call on this state, I call on this chamber to stand in support of the Ukrainian people as they fight for freedom. I'd ask us to rise for a moment of silence for the people of Ukraine. Thank you. God bless the people of Ukraine. Chair recognizes the senator from the 43rd for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Today I rise as I bring recognition, honor, and celebration of the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Today is AKA Day at the Capitol. I am here as a proud member of Chi Tau Omega chapter to celebrate the excellent service of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We have 5 targets. Our programs are HBCU for Life, Women's Health Care and Wellness, Building Your Economic Legacy, the Arts, and Global Impact. These programs are not just local, national, but they are international programs. We are dedicated to implementing the service that enhances the social, economic, and educational well-being of local, national, and international communities. These programs remain at the heart of AKA. The size and scope of services provided to our communities have grown and significantly improved the quality of life for all who reside within our service areas. Again, today is AKA Day at the Capitol, and we celebrate the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha, founded in 1908, and I am a proud member. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 24th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Black History Month is coming to an end, I want to recognize a lady from back home that lived about a mile up the road from where I live. I've known her my whole life. A couple of weeks ago, she turned 100 years old. Not quite as young as the senators from the 13th that turned 110 the other day. But Ludell Garnett is a great lady that served in Columbia County School System in the lunchroom at Columbia Middle School, where she served me several meals as coming up in school. Always had a smile on her face. I always wanted to make sure you had enough to eat. But this lady has been able to have a wonderful family, raising 7 children, and my hat's off to Ludell Garnett today. Thank you. I yield well, Mr. President.
I know what you meant. Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And good morning, colleagues. As Black History Month comes to a close, I want to just take a time to talk to you, excuse me, about the importance of Black History Month. More importantly, the influence that Black history has had on the state of Georgia. As you all know, the month of February is reserved to honor the many achievements made by African Americans. This month is, excuse me, This month is also reserved as a time to acknowledge the monumental role all African Americans have played in contributing to the United States history. The state of Georgia is thankful to have a number of revered pioneers who have contributed to making Black history what it is today. People such as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Julian Bond, John Lewis, Jose Williams, Ralph David Abernathy, and many, many others are just a few of the people who have paved the way for African American prosperity, not just in the state of Georgia, but throughout the United States and the world. As many of you know, Leroy Johnson was a revered politician who served here in this chamber from 1963 to 1975, after he won a seat in the 1962 election. So Johnson was the first Black senator to be elected to the legislature for more than 50 years. Serving District 38, Johnson was an attorney and played a major role in the civil rights movement right here in Atlanta and throughout the world in the 60s. He passed last year at the age of 91 after decades of exceptional service to the state of Georgia. As an educator, a government employee, an elected official, a renowned lawyer, as well as all his work in countless charities and organizations. Senator Johnson was the first African American that was hired by Fulton County government as in the district attorney's office. He worked as a criminal investigator there from 1957 to 1962, where he often worked pro bono for those who needed legal representation but were unable to afford an attorney. And I know it's almost over, but let me just say that I thought that we had 5 minutes. So that's why it's a little bit longer. But let me just say that, yes, Leroy Johnson was an honorable man and made monumental strides through his lifetime for the betterment of Georgia. Leroy Johnson lived a life of legacy and devotion to this great state. So I know firsthand, because since I was an infant, my uncle, Leroy Johnson, was my mentor. He was my favorite uncle, and I stand on his shoulders today. His picture hangs outside of this Senate chamber, and I'm so proud to have known him and loved him as a close family member. So, Mr. President, thank you for the extra minute. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 11th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to thank Governor Kemp. He has released a proclamation making today Rare Disease Day in Georgia. For those of you that don't know, rare diseases is a group of conditions that affect millions and millions of Americans, but because of their nature, they're very unusual and therefore usually very expensive to treat. One of the policy challenges facing states and all insurers is how to find a pathway to afford to be able to treat these conditions. There are professional organizations, and in Georgia, the one is called Georgia Bio, and they are a association of manufacturers of biologics that are developing medications to treat these rare conditions. And I just want to thank them for the work they do in Georgia. Thank the governor for his recognition that the people being affected by these rare diseases have a voice, and we want to make sure that we take their challenges seriously, and that we figure out a way that in our budget and appropriations process that we remember that these families in Georgia are facing many, many challenges. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate. Last week in this chamber, we had a little debate about sailboats. And the majority of Republicans in this chamber cast a vote in favor of requiring small motorless sailboats to carry a permit. But now today we'll be debating a bill that says carrying a gun should no longer require a permit. How many people are killed each year by guns? How many people are killed each year by small sailboats? Why did Republicans refuse to remove the requirement to permit a small, peaceful sailboat, but proudly and confidently remove the requirement to permit deadly guns? Now, the main argument made by one of the leaders in the majority party, one, I might add, running for higher office, is that we should continue permitting small sailboats because Georgia is one of the leading states for stolen sailboats, or stolen boats. But I wonder how many guns are stolen in Georgia every year. Well, guess what? There's no way to find out, because in Georgia, keeping track of stolen guns is not required. And when we eliminate carry permits for guns, no one will really care when a stolen gun ends up in a violent person's hands. Stolen guns, stolen sailboats. The majority of the senators in this chamber, by the votes you cast, evidently think small sailboats are more of a menace, requiring government regulation, than guns. Now, some of you are thinking that it's the person that's dangerous, not the gun, but I have never seen a drive-by sailboat shooting either. Now, Georgia hasn't always been this nonchalant and laissez-faire toward guns. In fact, again, right here in this chamber, 12 years ago, the majority of Republicans voted in favor of increasing the permitting of guns. In 2010, Senate Bill 308, appropriately dubbed the Common Sense Lawful Carry Act, for the first time in Georgia, required a permit to open carry any handgun. Now you want to take all that away, and more. What changed? Did guns become less dangerous? Hardly. Surprisingly, most of the senators present in this chamber who were present in this chamber in 2010 are no longer here. But there were two who were. Maybe they could tell us what changed. If they did, do you think they'd stand up here and tell us that gun deaths in Georgia have increased 25% over the last decade? Or that gun violence costs Georgia $12 billion annually, $531 million of that paid by taxpayers? Or that Georgia has the 6th highest rate of gun injuries in the entire United States? Or that 70% of the people support keeping permits of guns? No. But one of them stood up last week and told us that if the NRA wanted to pass a bill requiring a baby to put a gun in a diaper, he'd vote for it. We've lost all reasonableness and logic in this chamber when it comes to guns. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
You have a consent calendar of privileged resolutions before you. Does any senator wish to remove a resolution from the consent calendar? Is there objection to adoption of the resolutions on the consent calendar? The chair hears none, and the resolutions on the consent calendar are adopted. Are there any motions to withdraw and commit? You have a consent calendar of local bills before you. Mr. Secretary, are there any objections filed to any bills on the local consent calendar?
Mr. President, there are no objections filed.
Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the Committee on State and Local Government, which is favorable to the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. The question is on the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bills on the local consent calendar, the yeas are 49, the nays are 1. And the bills having received the requisite constitutional majority are therefore passed. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Mr. President, I ask for unanimous consent that the bills that were passed on the local consent calendar be immediately transmitted to the House.
The majority leader has asked for unanimous consent that the bills that were just passed on the local consent calendar be immediately transmitted to the House. Is there objection? The chair hears none, and those bills are immediately transmitted to the House. Chair recognizes the senator from the 9th to introduce to us our Doctor of the Day.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to introduce our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Lateefah Watford. Dr. Lateefah Watford serves as Chief of Behavioral Health for the Southeast Permanente Medical Group, the medical group that provides care for Kaiser Permanente of Georgia members. As a general child, adolescent, and forensic psychiatrist, she works diligently to ensure her patients receive the care they need in a respectful, caring, and clinically competent manner. A passionate advocate for access to mental health care and reducing the stigma around mental health. She works closely with her colleagues to educate patients and provide them with the tools to heal and move forward in their lives in a healthy manner, while also encouraging them to take an active role in developing and implementing appropriate coping skills. She believes in the importance of treating the entire person, body, mind, and spirit, and encourages all of her patients to be active in their self-care, take time to appreciate and celebrate the small things, and to laugh. She received her medical degree from Morehouse School of Medicine and completed residency training in pediatrics and general psychology, as well as fellowship in child and adolescence at Indiana University. She also completed a forensic psychiatry fellowship at Emory University. She joined Kaiser Permanente in 2012 and primarily sees patients for the Gwinnett KP Medical Office. An avid reader and traveler when not working, Dr. Watford enjoys taking trips with her family and learning about different cultures and different locations. Let's honor our Doctor of the Day, Dr. Lateefah Watford. I yield the well.
All right, we're now going to move on to the rules calendar. We're going to move on to the rules calendar. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 479?
Senate Bill 479, a bill by Senators Hatchett of the 50th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 1611-131 of the OCGA relating to possession of firearms by convicted felons and first offender probationers, so as to specify that each firearm in the possession of or attempted possession of certain offenders shall be charged as a separate offense and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass by substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Albers of the 56th District Chairman. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 479 to amend Code Section 1611-131 of the OCGA relating to possession of firearms by convicted felons and first offender probationers, so as to specify that each firearm in the possession or attempted possession of certain offenders shall be charged as a separate offense and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the distinguished senator from the 50th District to present the measure.
I was waiting for that one. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I rise today to bring you Senate Bill 479. This bill takes actions to ensure that convicted felons are held properly accountable when illegally possessing a gun. The courts have read our current law to mean that even if a convicted felon is in possession of an arsenal of weapons, he or she can only be charged with one single count of possession. This runs contrary to logic and against how prosecutors in Georgia have always charged offenders in possession of multiple firearms. This bill fixes that problem and ensures that convicted felons will be held accountable for each firearm or weapon that they obtain. It's pretty cut and dry. You know, what this bill does is it basically changes the law to where if you are in possession of multiple firearms and you're a convicted felon, you can be charged for each firearm that you possess, and not just the prosecutor's not just tied to only charge you with one. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to yield for questions.
It doesn't appear as though you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Does any other senator wish to rise to speak for or against Senate Bill 479? The chair sees none. The question is on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to adoption of the committee substitute? The chair hears none, and the committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Question on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 43, the nays are 9. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 259?
Senate Bill 259, a bill by Senators Mullis of the 53rd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 4 of Chapter 11 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to dangerous instrumentalities and practices so as to revise various laws pertaining to firearms and the carrying and possession of firearms and other weapons, to revise database prohibition, to provide for a definition, to provide for causes of action, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Public Safety recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Albers of the 56th District Chairman. Mr. President, Senator Mullis of the 53rd District and others offer the following amendment number 1. Amend Senate Bill 259 by replacing lines 32 through 37 with the following. Contained in this code section shall prohibit municipalities or counties or consolidated governments by ordinance or resolution from reasonably limiting or prohibiting the discharge of firearms within the boundaries of the municipal corporation, county, or consolidated government. 2. No municipality, county, or consolidated government shall prohibit the discharge of firearms on a parcel of land that is 10 acres or more and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd to present Senate Bill 259 and Amendment Number 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I appreciate you being in attendance today for this outstanding piece of legislation. I'm going to give you the quick version. First, I want to thank the Georgia Carry, and now I think they're called the Second Amendment 2A Association. Mr. Mahoney and Steve Lofton, they do an outstanding job, and they're very trustworthy. And I appreciate their attention to helping us with Second Amendment issues. This bill expands the ban on creating multiple jurisdiction database. It's not proper to people's personal and private information to be transmitted all across the state and nation. So they can only use it in that county to deal with issues regarding the Second Amendment. The private and personal information will not be tolerated for being released to other agencies or other entities in this. It also prohibits local government from banning the discharge of firearms on their property if it's 10 acres or more. Of course, they have to use all the other safety and proper ordinances when they're firing their firearm, but we're talking about the Second Amendment, and they have the right to bear arms, including on their property, especially in multi-jurisdictional areas and just all jurisdictional areas. Also, it imposes penalties on government when it fails to auction off weapons. Now let me explain. If a weapon has, the serial number's been filed off, or it's in bad shape and it's broken, or it's an illegal weapon like a sawed-off shotgun, those still can be disposed of. But it requires that the jurisdiction or the law enforcement agency has to auction off the good weapons within 12 months. Mr. President, it's that simple. I'd be glad to answer a couple of questions if need be, but I know that the opposition would love to come down here and just talk about how they hate the Second Amendment.
The chair recognizes the senator from the 6th with a question to your right.
I'll yield.
Will the senator yield? Thank you. In terms of some of the things you were just saying with respect to the database, is the concern that law-abiding Georgians should not have to put their name in a database and be tracked by their own government?
That is correct.
Okay, especially when it comes to a constitutional right?
That's right.
Okay. In terms
Wait a minute.
of...
You sound like a Republican with that question, so I'm confused.
Well, I believe in the Constitution. In terms of your advocacy for the residents of Buckhead, one of my concerns with respect to this particular bill has to do with noise ordinances. And specifically, as you know, there have been issues all
Hang on. All right.
all around the metro area with respect to street racing and the noise that it causes and keeps people up at night. In terms of discharging firearms, obviously, they make noise as well. My concern is that this would preempt localities from being able to regulate guns on the basis of a noise ordinance.
Well, I'm not sure if I agree with that. I believe other ordinances would be proper in make sure that people are using common sense and firing their firearm within perhaps a small area. I don't know if 10 acres is small. It's not for me. But I think that would be part of their ordinances that might be, lawyers got to eat too, right? So a lot of legal activity could be part of this.
Will the senator yield for one more
Yes, I
question?
will.
Would you be open to an amendment over in the House to make sure that noise ordinances would not be preempted?
Well, I don't know if I'd be open to that, but I have deep respect for the House to put their say on a bill. So we'll see how it ends. Thank you for the question, Senator.
Do you continue to yield?
I think I'll sit down and watch the show, and Mr. President, I will come back and answer any questions, or I'll be glad to close at the end of this dialogue. So thank you very much. I appreciate your favorable vote on this, and I yield the will.
Does any other senator wish to speak for or against Senate Bill 259 or the amendment? The chair sees none. All right, we're going to first take up amendment number 1. Is there objection to adoption of amendment number 1? The chair hears none, and amendment number 1 is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor vote yea. Opposed nay. The secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 33, the nays are 20. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed as amended. Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption of Senate Bill 250 or Senate Bill 319?
Senate Bill 319, a bill by Senators Anna Vitarte of the 31st and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 3 of Title 12 of the OCGA relating to general provisions regarding parks, historic areas, memorials, and recreation, to amend Part 3 of Article 4 of Chapter 11 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to carrying and possession of firearms, to amend Part 2 of Article 4 of Chapter 12 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to transportation and passenger safety, to amend Title 27 of the OCGA relating to game and fish and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Strickland of the 17th District Chairman. Mr. President, Senators Al of the 48th and others offer the following amendment to amend Senate Bill 319 by inserting firearms on line 6 to amend Part 5 of Article 4 of Chapter 11 of Title 16 of the OCGA relating to Brady Law regulations, so as to require universal background checks in all manner of firearm transfers and purposes, to provide for exceptions, to provide for criminal penalties, to provide for applicability, and by inserting after line 527 and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 31st to speak to Senate Bill 319.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start by addressing the provisions of Senate Bill 319. This technical piece is important to frame our discussion today. Senate Bill 319 simply combs through current law and strikes the requirements for needing a permit to legally carry a firearm. The carry permit holder is also redefined as a lawful weapons carrier. Now, why is this important? No other underlying or existing law has changed. And let me repeat that. No other underlying or existing law is changed. The laws applying to the purchase of a firearm and legal possession of a firearm remain in place. Simply put, in order to legally carry a firearm, a person must have either legally purchased the firearm or be in legal possession of the firearm. Also, because we do not eliminate anything other than the requirement to have a carry permit, an individual can still apply to have a carry permit if they choose. There are various reasons that this might occur, such as the ability to carry a firearm in states with reciprocity. This law is strictly intended to remove an unnecessary burden from law-abiding Georgians. So when opponents cite tragic stories or heinous acts of violence and heartbreaking tragedies, please recognize those are due to the actions of criminals. What everyone in this chamber needs to understand is this: the growing response by law-abiding constituents to hearing these terrible stories is to go buy a gun and protect themselves. They want to protect themselves from the criminals who are committing the crimes, criminals who do not care about having a carry permit. Data shows that during the first 16 months of the pandemic, over 5 million Americans bought their first gun. A Pew Research study shows that the massive surge was driven by increasing purchases by women and people of color. It's understandable. Think of the images that we have seen over that time. They have turned on the national news and saw buildings on fire and stores being looted while reporters stood in the foreground talking about mostly peaceful protests. They watched police stations and federal courthouses under siege and autonomous zones being established without consequences. They heard people espousing crazy ideas like defund the police, and some politicians just did that. They thought to themselves, who's going to protect me and the people I love? Meanwhile, here in Georgia, they see a Wendy's burned to the ground and the area around it taken over while the police are ordered to stand down. They see their own eyes, local shop windows boarded up from looting, but didn't see it reported on the evening news. You want to know who is buying a gun for the first time and wants to carry it for self-defense? It's a young mom who just heard on the radio in her car that there was another carjacking at her neighborhood gas station. And so with this surge in the first-time gun ownership by law-abiding individuals, there are more people needing to get a carry permit. Let me be clear. They want a permit. They want the permit because they want to follow the law, and current law says you have to have one. What they don't want is to be slow-walked through a completely unnecessary step in their quest to legally have the ability to defend themselves. I have no doubt there's going to be plenty of robust discussion today, probably for a while. And I understand that not everyone is going to agree. Some people choose to blame inanimate objects for the actions of criminals and then associate the actions of criminals with law-abiding citizens. That's okay. But I would caution my opponents that that kind of flawed logic leads to one thing: more people, good people from all walks of life, going to buy more guns and more ammo before some gun-grabbing politician will make it harder to protect themselves, their family, and their property. Regardless of what might be said today, this bill is about people, not politics. It's about the good guys. Today we empower good people, law-abiding people. And it's about the bad guys, the violent felons, the domestic abusers, the gangsters, and the drug dealers. If they are carrying a gun, they already are breaking the law by possessing it. My question to you is, whose side are you on? With that, Mr. President, I yield for a couple questions.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th with a question.
Will the senator yield for a series of questions?
I will yield for some questions from my friend from the 6th.
They'll be easy.
You're an attorney, I expect that.
Senator, would you agree that there should be no extra layers or extra steps to be able to exercise a constitutional right?
Yeah, I think having any government barrier in place is unnecessary. And I think all we're talking about here is removing a permit in 319. We're not changing any laws in Georgia.
And so, Senator, would you agree that a requirement by the government to apply for a permit or for a card that then allows you to exercise your constitutional right is an unreasonable government-sponsored barrier?
Well, is your question going to pertain to 319, or are we going down a rabbit hole to talk about some other issue?
We're talking about the Constitution.
Well, we're talking about the Constitution, but today we're talking about 319.
We're talking about constitutional rights. So do you agree or do you
understand that.
not agree?
Today, all we're talking about is removing a government barrier for somebody to carry a weapon in Georgia.
Senator, would you agree that a citizen of this state should not have to wait to be able to exercise his or her constitutional rights?
I think as it relates to Senate Bill 319, we saw thousands of Georgians during the pandemic that had a government barrier placed in front of them with government offices closed, not being able to obtain their carry permit.
And Senator, with respect to some of the concerns voiced at the hearing, the judiciary hearing, that law-abiding Georgians should not have to put their name in a database tracked by their government across state lines, would you agree that law-abiding Georgians should not have to put their name in a database, be tracked across state lines, and be subject to criminal prosecution if they failed to do so?
I think law-abiding Georgians have nothing to worry about if they're not breaking the law. I think the worry should be for criminals.
And then finally, Senator, would you agree that bad guys don't follow the laws anyway, so why shouldn't we just make it hard? Why should we make it harder for the good guys to exercise their constitutional rights?
I think we shouldn't punish law-abiding citizens, and we should punish criminals and street gangs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Do you continue to yield?
Sure, one more, why not?
Chair recognizes the senator from the 26th with a question.
Does the senator yield?
Yes, sir.
If we change the law, right now you go to magistrate court to get a gun
Probate court.
carrying permit. What about those folks who might have mental problems, or those folks who have been involved in family violence?
Senator, if you're a law-abiding citizen, then you can carry your weapon. If you fall into one of the categories that is currently prohibited under federal code or state code, you can't carry lawfully in the state of Georgia.
Senator further yield.
Yes, sir.
How do you know they're law abiding or don't have a mental problem if you do not go and actually file for a carrying permit?
Well, Senator, I don't think it's the job of government to force citizens to have to walk around with papers determining whether they're law-abiding or not. I think we're afforded those rights as a United States citizen.
Senator further yield.
Yes, sir. Yes, Senator.
Senator, is it not true that people skirt the law and sometimes they'll not they have not been adjudicated as a criminal, but might have issues mentally? And isn't it true that a person with a mental problem who might be on medication that does not take their medication ends up with a firearm that does damage to someone or hurt someone or kill someone?
Well, Senator, I'm here to talk about 319 and not talk about hypotheticals. I think the other discussion is recently the Georgia Supreme Court ruled in Bell v. Hargrove that absent a conviction, a license can't be denied. So if we want to continue slow rolling, government excuses for not allowing somebody to carry in the state of Georgia, I think that's fine. I think federal law and state law are very, very, very prescriptive on this issue and how those situations are handled. So, to sit here and for me to go down the rabbit hole of, what may happen or what may not happen as it relates to a law-abiding Georgian, I think is ridiculous.
Senator further yield.
Sure, Senator.
Senator, isn't it true that if you're a convicted felon, under the laws of Georgia, you can apply for a restoration of rights? And once you receive the restoration of rights, if you've been a convicted felon, you can get a liquor license, a gun license, as though you've never had a crime or been convicted of a crime. Isn't that true?
I'll trust the senator speaks to know what he believes, but at the same time, we're here to talk about 319. And I'll tell you that, you know, growing up, and I talked about this a little bit in committee, is, you know, my brother and I, when we grew up, we hung around gangbangers. My brother was in a gang. We hung around Bad Element. We hung around people who were arrested. They shipped drugs. They shot people. They did all kinds of crazy stuff. So those are the people we're trying to keep guns out of the hands of. And if you're a criminal, you're a criminal. If you're a good guy, you're a good guy. I think this is pretty black and white in terms of who's good and who's bad. With that, Mr. President, I yield the will.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 48th to present amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I rise today to speak to the amendment that I've introduced for Senate Bill 319. I consider this amendment to be consistent with the stated assumptions of the bill itself, in that it would support and strengthen the points that the senator from the 31st has made regarding pre-existing means to ensure safe, responsible, and legal gun ownership. So in the committee hearing, which I watched the live stream of, while introducing this bill on the floor today, the senator from the 31st noted that this bill does not change the fact that, and I quote this from your committee meeting, quote, "We still need to do a background check to purchase a gun," unquote. And that is generally true. Federally licensed firearms dealers are required by law to run a background check before selling a firearm, often using the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System, or NICS system. The people who are screened out in this background check, I'm just going to go through this so we understand what we're talking about. The people who are screened out are those that we as a society generally agree should not have ready access to a gun. And these people include, I'm just going to list them, convicted felons, people with federal domestic restraining orders, people convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence crimes, people who have been committed to mental health facilities or those who a court has ruled mentally unfit, fugitives, and people convicted of drug crimes or determined by court to be addicted to an illicit substance. And again, while it's not perfect or absolute by any means, I think that we can agree that a background check at the point of sale serves as a pretty good filter to make sure that the people who buy guns are responsible, safe, and law-abiding gun owners, to the excellent point of the senator from the 31st. However, we also know that someone who is not a federally licensed gun dealer can sell a gun without a background check. And these sales can occur in places like gun shows, flea markets, via private transactions or gun sales, and through online ads, for example, on sites like Arms List. Per study published by the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2017, nearly 1 out of 4 recent gun sales and transfers were completed without a background check. And I have the citation for that if anyone needs it. I think we can agree that this leaves a huge hole in our safety net, further exacerbated by the fact that with the passage of SB 319, this background check at the point of sale would be the first and only way to weed out those who should not have legal access to firearms. So what this amendment proposes is really quite straightforward, and you can read through it, and that is to extend the background check requirement to private gun sales and transfers so as to support and strengthen the point that the author of the bill makes, which is that, and again, I quote from committee meeting, quote, "We still need to do a background check to purchase a gun." And I think that he is making that point so that the need for a concealed carry permit on top of this would be duplicative. Just to walk you through it, lines 26 through 66 also provide what I think are very reasonable carve-outs from the background check requirement, including for guns that are replicas or artifacts, guns that are transferred between law enforcement agencies and professionals, guns that are gifts between spouses or close family members as defined in lines 40 through 43, guns transferred as part of an inheritance or trust, guns transferred temporarily to prevent imminent harm or death of the owner or family member or household member of the gun owner, transfer for repair of a gun to a gunsmith, or temporary transfer at a gun range or for the purpose of hunting, trapping, and fishing. And even with these common sense carve-outs, the benefits of this amendment should be quite clear. A universal background check at the point of sale or transfer would most clearly determine who is and who is not, in the language of the bill, a, quote, lawful weapons carrier. The amendment would close a loophole that weakens the intent and the argument behind the original bill. And the effort proposed by the amendment is not only supported by more than 80% of Americans, it is supported by more than 70% of NRA members. And I have the citation for that too, if anyone needs it. There are few other measures with this degree of consensus on both sides of the gun safety and gun rights issue, and it is for these reasons that I consider this amendment consistent with the stated assumption of SB 319, and I ask for your favorable consideration as we move forward on this bill. And I'm happy to stand for questions on this amendment.
You have no questions.
Okay.
Chair recognizes the minority leader to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I rise today on Senate Bill 319 because when I turned the TV on this morning to look at the weather and the traffic, the first story that was on there was that a four-year-old child was killed last night in a parking lot at a grocery store. When I think of a 4-year-old, I think of my great-granddaughter that's 4 years old. And I think of a young boy that was 4 years old that was killed in a church a few years ago. So I just want us to pause and think about the kinds of bills that we are passing here today. It seems that we are deregulating. We are going backwards instead of forward. And I just want to give you a few facts that you can keep in mind. The rate of gun deaths in Georgia has increased by 41% from 33%, which is the national average. And this happened between 2011 and 2020. Gun violence in Georgia costs $12 billion a year, and $581 million of that is paid by taxpayers. In Georgia, the rate of gun suicide increased by 13%, and gun homicide increased 92% since 2011, also higher than the national rate. And if you want to look for these facts, you can go to cdc.gov, and I have a couple of more sites that you can check out. Suicide makes up 57% of gun deaths in Georgia. And Georgia's firearm suicide rate has remained consistently higher than the national rate. Research consistently shows access to firearms increases with the likelihood of suicide. In Georgia, the 10 leading causes of death lists suicide as number 10 in Georgia. That's 14.6 per 100,000 people. In Georgia, the use of firearms and family violence reported to law enforcement is on the rise, and the rate of fatal accidents increases as firearms use increase. There is a 500% increase in risk of homicide when an abusive intimate partner has access to a gun. and Georgia has the 6th highest rate of gun injuries in the U.S. Despite the fact that advocates for guns claim they are for self-protection, the evidence shows that the presence of a firearm in a domestic violence incident raises the likelihood of a homicide, regardless of who owns the gun. So I really think that we need to give a lot of thought and pause to how we are treating our gun laws and what we are doing here. We are allowing every person, even if you've committed a crime, to own a gun. That's the way I see it. Mr. President, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 6th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. So here's a modest proposal. For every gun law that we pass to loosen gun restrictions, why don't we do the same for voting? Carrying a firearm is a God-given right enshrined by the Second Amendment, as we've been told. Same for the right to vote. 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, 25th Amendments. Voting should be equally free of government restrictions, or at least afforded the same level of constitutional freedom. As we heard from the sponsor and as we've heard from people pushing these laws, no extra layers or steps to be able to exercise a constitutional right. Permits, license, registration, unconstitutional, government-sponsored barriers. Waiting periods? I shouldn't have to wait to get my gun. But by God, we will put deadlines, restrictions, timelines on people when all they want to do is exercise the franchise, cast a vote. You know, the approach taken by the majority party in this chamber often gives me whiplash. From day-to-day pieces of legislation are justified on grounds that are illusory at best, while at the same time other pieces of legislation completely ignore and are indeed counter to the reality of the very real problems we face in every community in this state. And let's be clear, in terms of gun violence, it is in every community. It is not an urban problem. It is not an exurban problem. It is not a coastal problem. It is not a mountain problem. It is a Georgia problem. But with respect to voting rights, while they want to loosen restrictions with respect to guns, have guns everywhere, have them everywhere. When it comes to voting, the majority is going to tell you when, where, how, with what ID, what document, what deadline you will have to deal with to exercise your God-given rights. Looser gun laws, stricter voting laws, all the while the body count adds up while the votes don't. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 50th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today I rise in support of this legislation, and I want to be brief, but I also want to bring up a point my colleague from the 6th just brought up about voting. In the state of Georgia, we respect the constitutional right to vote. In the state of Georgia, we respect the constitutional right to defend yourself under the Second Amendment. The distinction between the regulations with guns and the regulation with voting needs to be made clear. under the United States Constitution, you're allowed to possess a handgun in order to defend yourself. You're allowed to possess weapons in order to defend yourself. You're allowed to vote in order to let your voice be heard in elections. My right to defend myself is not infringed upon because my neighbor owns 3 guns. But my right to vote is infringed upon if my neighbor is allowed to vote 3 times and I'm only allowed to vote once. So the distinction in IDs for voting, the regulations for voting, is to make sure, number 1, that it's easy to vote, but number 2, that it's hard to cheat. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has yielded the well. The chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's so disappointing to see this bill on the floor. Georgia is already a pro-gun state, probably has been since its founding. Way too pro-gun, actually, if you look at public surveys, including the one most recently done by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Way too pro-gun if you look at the research that comes out from institutions that are experts on gun violence. In fact, the Giffords Law Center just released its annual scorecard of gun laws, and the reckless current gun laws here in Georgia have earned us an F. Even so, we used to have a teeny modicum of sensibility around gun legislation. Bills to eliminate carry permits that look a lot like this one that we're debating right now have been out there for years. So what happened? Well, this year we have a tough primary for a sitting Republican governor, and sadly, that seems to appear advancing a whole slew of red meat issues, cultural wedge issues. And in the case of this bill, advancing the dangerous agenda of extremist gun groups. In fact, one of the most vocal proponents of this bill, a gentleman named Aaron Dorr, is famously the subject of an NPR podcast called No Compromise. Knew his name sounded familiar when he showed up in the judiciary hearing. No compromise. The bullying tactics of these pro-gun extremists are predictable, but it's so sad to see legislators cowed by them and embracing ignorance when it comes to dangerous weapons. Can't we do better than that, y'all? We have a wealth of data that informs us that more guns leads to more gun violence, more deaths, more accidents, more suicides, more bloodshed. It is not particularly difficult to understand why this is true. Guns are deadly weapons. The presence of a gun can turn a simple disagreement violent in a flash. In fact, we saw an example of this in a gun store of all places just last month, when a silly argument among the workers led to one of them being shot. That pretty much distills why this is a bad bill. So data shows us that more guns lead to more gun deaths. This data comes from multiple reliable sources, not one carefully curated talking point by people paid by the gun lobby to distort the truth. No. This data is from the CDC and the FBI, from the UN and the OECD, and peer-reviewed studies, peer-reviewed and replicated from institutions like Harvard, Johns Hopkins, the University of Washington, and many other elite institutions. So because of all that, we know that, first, our country, America, has a crime rate that's widely similar to other developed countries. But when you get to guns, it's a different story. We are less than 5% of the world's population and own 45% of the world's guns. So our homicide rates are 7 times greater than Canada, 22 times greater than the European Union, and 23 times greater than Australia. When a gun is involved, assaults lead to more homicides, and victims of domestic violence are 5 times more likely to die. And guns are not even effective in reducing harm, which is the argument advanced by this legislation, or one of them. Using FBI data, 8 times more people were shot and killed in an argument than by civilians trying to stop any crime. The vaunted good guy with a gun, 8 times less effective. 8 times less effective than the number of people shot and killed in an argument. And a study in Philadelphia found that the odds of an assault victim being shot are 4.5 times greater if that person was carrying a gun. But let's look closer to home for a minute. In 2014, the General Assembly passed and Governor Deal signed a bill to obliterate many common sense gun regulations in Georgia, allowing people to carry guns in more places and limiting law enforcement's ability to determine if the gun was carried lawfully. In case you don't remember, let me remind you that a talking point at that time was what distinguishes a good guy with a gun from a bad guy with a gun is a carry permit, the very thing we are now moving to do away with. At that time, law enforcement warned that this would inhibit their ability to protect our communities. Democrats in this chamber warned that this law would increase gun violence. And despite proponents, extremists, I would call them, toting signs that said, "Guns save lives," predictably, more guns on the street killed more Georgians since 2014. All those warnings have come true. The gun homicide rate in our state has risen 40%, 2013 to 2019. In fact, the gun homicide rate spiked right after we passed that Guns Everywhere law, 35% between 2013 and 2016 alone, over a third more gun deaths after the so-called Gun Save Lives bill was signed into law. The facts are just not debatable. More guns out in the community did not make us safer. A lot more people died. What we should be doing to protect ourselves, each other, and our communities is pass legislation with proven effects to help us reduce these abysmal figures and tragic stories. Laws that have been implemented in other states, they've been upheld by the courts and deemed constitutional and have reduced gun deaths in those states. The most effective of these include universal background checks that cover all guns at a point of sale. Good news, we'll get to vote on that, Senator from the 48th Amendment. So I look forward to that being swiftly adopted. Mandatory wait periods, strengthening our weapons license by requiring gun safety training, implementing bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, pass laws that safeguard children. Last year I filed SB 146. That would require safe storage to cut down on accidents and requiring guns to have child-proofing features. Red flag laws that take weapons from those who are a risk to themselves or others until they no longer are, and enforcing laws to protect victims of domestic violence. We heard testimony in Judiciary Committee from the Georgia Commission on Family Violence about how poor our laws are when it comes to protecting victims of domestic violence, causing domestic violence deaths, and how this law, this bill, will not help the situation. Repealing stand your ground laws that encourage vigilantism. We know what we need to do to protect our communities, but we're doing the opposite. We're not protecting innocent children like Grayson Fleming Gray, the little baby, 6-month-old, shot and killed sitting in his car seat this year from random gunfire, or the other 6 children killed by guns in just Atlanta this year. Or Matthew Wilson, this one I'm humiliated about, a visiting British astrophysicist who died in his girlfriend's apartment in Brookhaven because of jerks just shooting guns off outside. I wonder what the headlines look like in England. There they go again, those stupid Americans. And that's exactly what I would think, and that's what I think. We're the laughingstock of the developed world with our gun laws. And I feel terrible that this British astrophysicist visited our city and died as a result of our asinine gun laws. We're not protecting minority communities that are disproportionately impacted by gun violence, or women like Soon Chung Park, killed last year at the Gold Spa. Listen up, we're not protecting people like Ahmaud Arbery, considered a threat by just being in the neighborhood. That and the stand your ground laws combined, they chase him down and kill him right there in the streets, and almost got away with it until that video surfaced. We're not protecting the school children in Parkland, Florida, or the kids threatened, killed, or impacted by the hundreds of school shootings that have happened all over this country in the past decade. We're not protecting women who are being abused right now, and we're not helping protect people who are at risk for suicide, because having the ready availability of a deadly weapon in that moment of despair makes it much more likely that they will not live to see their loved ones seek help, resume their lives. And this certainly doesn't help law enforcement do their jobs to keep the public safe. But we heard a lot of talk from the senator from the 31st about how everyone should be scared because they see a lot of danger on the streets, and so they need guns to protect themselves from the criminals. Well, the real irony of this bill is that it directly protects criminals. It's amazing. You heard that right, criminals. The Council of Superior Court Judges reported that 5,200 weapons carry permits were denied last year alone. This number is artificially low because we actually don't require counties to report. The most common reason for the denial is past criminal conviction. So in this bill, the immediate effect is that we make it easier for criminals to have guns, to make it easier for there to be bad guys with guns. And this whole good guy with a gun thing is so infuriating because don't forget, everyone is a good guy with a gun before they commit their first crime. Everyone is law-abiding before they aren't. Everyone is a good guy before they become a quote-unquote gangbanger. Ubiquitous guns mean more accidents, suicides, road rage incidents, and yes, more former good guys who are now bad guys. This law, this bill, creates and nurtures the bad guys. In fact, all of our lax gun laws create and nurture the bad guys. And that is the real tragedy of this bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm happy to answer questions or yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 10th with a question.
President, would the senator yield?
Certainly, to my friend. from the
Senator,
tenth.
thank you for explaining the really what's embedded in this bill. I heard you barely mention law enforcement. Do you know of any law enforcement organizations in favor of this legislation?
I did not hear of any that were in favor of it, Senator.
Senator Further Yield?
I do.
Senator, I know you mentioned Parkland. Wasn't there an incident where a case was settled with Parkland for some huge amount of money related to their guns being involved in those killings down in Florida?
You know, that does ring a bell. I can't remember the specifics, but I will tell you that one case like that that's very interesting to me is that we paid out, American taxpayers paid out a huge amount to the victims of the Charleston church, the Mother Emanuel church massacre. Because of the way our laws are set up that, like this, purposely disallow safety checks. That guy, Dylan Roof, got a gun. The background hadn't come back. The check hadn't come back. And because of the stupidity of our laws, when the background check hadn't come back, they said, well, you got to give him the gun. And we paid out millions of dollars, and all of us paid for it. And we had a horrific incident where these worshipers were all murdered. And we all paid for it, too. Thanks. Yeah.
Senator Further Yield?
Yes, Senator.
Senator, I believe the amount that was reported was in the order of $70 million that a gun manufacturer settled with the victims.
Oh, are you talking about Remington and Sandy Hook?
That's correct.
That's what you're talking about. Okay, yes, that did just happen, Senator, yes.
Senator, this legislation, is there any provision in here to stop the illegal transfer or even the trafficking of weapons in this country?
I see nothing like that. And actually, let me just additionally mention that I can't remember the exact statistic, but we are one of the biggest feeder states of illegal guns to other states. And they are then subsequently used in crimes. So there's nothing in this that would help that. No, it would make it worse.
Senator Further Yield?
Yes, Senator.
Senator, is there anything in this legislation that talks about gun safety in terms of putting mechanisms on guns so that kids cannot easily use these weapons?
Nothing, Senator.
Have any reason why none of that? I heard you mention a political season. Do you know any reason why they wouldn't have, in fact, if they are very interested in protecting rifle gun ownership, that they will have these kind of mechanisms in place?
That's right. These things are widely popular among the general public. They obviously make sense. And unfortunately, as I mentioned in my remarks, we have a majority that, it depresses me to say, is enthralled to gun extremists.
Thank you, Senator.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th with a question.
Does Senator yield?
I do.
I want to ask you about the amendment you spoke on. Do you have it in front of you?
I don't.
Well, I can tell you the amendment has these exceptions where, there you go. Starting on line 27, all the way through line 66. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you
I mean,
signed
kind
on
of. I didn't get to read the whole thing right now, but
You signed this amendment, correct?
yes.
So you're familiar with it?
I mean, I did not. I signed it a long time ago, and I have not read it in the last 2 weeks. So I probably can't speak to everything if you're going from line 28 to 72.
Or do you further yield?
Yes.
Lines 27 through 66 are these exceptions to where in these private sales, someone would not have to go through the background check process, correct?
I think there may be something in there about antique guns and collecting. I think I heard the senator from the 48th speak to that.
And so who is to decide whether or not these exceptions would apply to you? How is someone to know whether or not they made an exception?
Well, Senator, what I would say is that there was ample opportunity to ask the senator from the 48th questions when she was up here, and no one took that opportunity, and this isn't my amendment, so I'm not prepared to answer all your questions about it right now.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
And so is your name on the front of this amendment?
I already explained that.
That's a yes?
It appears to be, yeah. I signed it a while ago, like I said, and I have not read it in the last 10 days or so. So no, I'm not prepared to. Maybe the senator from the 48th, you guys could have a private conversation.
Do you further yield?
Certainly.
Do you believe there should be certain exceptions to where a background check would not be required for private transfers of guns?
If there's some collector's item or something, I can see where that would make sense.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
So how is someone to decide whether or not they meet that exception that you just made?
They would need to look at the law as it relates to antique firearms.
So it's up to the individual to decide whether or not the law would apply to them?
Well, no, I mean, just like any law, it's not what they think, it's what is the law. Just like, you know, any law that we have. I mean, you, as we know, as attorneys, ignorance is no defense of the law, so it is up to each and every citizen to avail themselves of the correct law and follow it.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
With an amendment like this, only the good guys would actually follow the law, correct?
Well, here we actually have some in this underlying bill. We have bad guys trying to follow the law. 5,200 criminals who actually went to try to get their weapons carry permit. So,
Do you further yield?
sure.
And so under the amendment, someone has to decide whether or not they meet an exception in advance and decide whether or not they'll actually perform a background check, correct?
I would say that that would be the case for deciding, availing oneself of all laws. Like, someone has to decide if they need to get a hunting license. You know, I mean, that's just routine part of being part of society.
And the same, somebody has to decide whether or not they want to get a concealed carry permit now, correct?
They should be following the law as it relates to concealed carry permit. Of course, we make that law very difficult to enforce on purpose. We could save a lot of bloodshed were we actually to allow our law enforcement to do their jobs.
Do you further yield?
Yes,
Can law enforcement stop someone and ask them whether or not they have a concealed carry permit?
I don't believe they can.
Do you further yield?
Yes,
And for the over 5,000 people you said that applied for a concealed carry permit did not get one in the state, is that the number you used?
I think it was, if memory serves, 5,200 or 5,300 last year alone, and that is an undercount because of, we don't have the requirement for counties to submit the data.
And those are people that, even under this bill, still cannot legally possess a firearm, correct?
They cannot, but since we've hamstrung law enforcement, you can run out the logical conclusion on that one.
And you further yield?
Yes.
And so for the people that decide to follow your amendment and decide that the law does apply to them, they actually have their rights infringed upon because they decide to follow the law, correct?
No, I disagree. You're talking about antique firearm exchanges?
Well, you have more than
I don't
that.
see how their rights are infringed upon.
If you take a look at the bill in front of you, the amendment in front of you, for example, line 40.
I don't see the infringement.
No further.
Do you continue to yield?
Yes.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 36th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Does the senator yield?
Yes, I do.
Senator, you have portrayed, isn't it true, some harrowing examples of firearms deaths, firearm violence in our society. Isn't that true?
It is.
And you have in particular provided harrowing details about the incidence of the increase in gun violence here in our state.
Yes.
Since the laws were loosened and the guns everywhere law
That's
is
correct.
all over Georgia. Isn't that right?
Sad, predictable, but yes, sad to say, yes.
And of particular note, do you recall under Republican administration in Washington where it was actually written into the law, it prohibited, where we were prohibited from gathering and keeping statistics and studying the incidence of gun violence?
Yes, you were talking about the Dickey Amendment. And Jay Dickey, before he died, wrote an op-ed where he said, oh, big mistake. Shouldn't have done that. And that was because the gun extremist lobby kicked into action because they knew that if data were collected, it would demonstrate that people are not safer when they have guns. They're not safer in their house. They're not safer with their boyfriend. They're not safer on the street. And that more guns lead to more deaths. So
And
they didn't
so-
want it studied.
And
Because
so
they want to sell more guns.
Exactly. And isn't it true that those who make massive amounts of money on manufacturing and marketing firearms have been proven to do it in ways to appeal to machoism, and owning a gun makes you a man? Haven't we seen those ads that the gun manufacturers, isn't it true,
Yes.
are using to promote
I agree with
guns,
you, Senator.
ownership,
I agree
gun
with you.
use?
And actually, to the senator from the 10th point, that is gets into what the high dollar Remington settlement was about, where Remington was forced to pay out because of those type of ads appealing to mentally deranged young men.
So, according to the facts that you provided, it's true, is it not, that gun violence through the roof in Georgia?
True.
Some of the laxest gun laws in the country here in Georgia.
True.
And we reap the bloody harvest, isn't it true? We see the senseless deaths.
We do.
From this ill-considered policy that's bowing, is it not true, to a very extremist, tiny sector of people who are pushing this guns everywhere policy. Isn't that true?
It is true.
And if you could explain to us again what our officials have reported to us when they are reviewing applications for gun permits. What are the numbers on those who are declined access to a permit because for good, valid reasons that are in the law?
That's correct. So I don't have in front of me, when we were in committee, I had the past 5 years or so in front of me from the Council of Superior Court Judges, who, of course, manage the weapons carry license process in the probate courts. And so, but last year, it was 5,200 denied. Actually, it might have been 2020, because 2021 is coming in right about now in the next couple months. So actually, I misspoke. It was 2020, and 5,200 were denied. And by far, the most common reason is criminal conviction, felonies, and domestic violence.
So it's not really a stretch, is it, Senator, to say that voting for this bill, as it's been presented here, continues the bloody trail of people injured and killed with gun violence here in our state? And truly, couldn't it be said, the blood is on the hands of those who vote for this type of legislation, who sign it into law, and who promote it? Is that not true?
I think that's true.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th with a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Yes, I yield.
You referenced a law change. I think the previous senator referred to it as the Guns Everywhere bill. I was not in the chamber at that time. Can you remind me what year that was?
2014, I believe.
2014, thank you. Do you further yield?
Yes.
We've had skyrocketing crime in this state, and particularly in our capital city and the areas surrounding it in the last 12 months. Isn't that true?
Well, actually, I do have a chart on county variations in crime rates right here. Homicide rates. And you will find when you look at it that actually McDuffie County has the highest gun death rate, followed by Crisp County and followed by Crisp County.
That's year over year. From what years are you looking at there, Senator?
I'm not sure. It's just from this most recent compilation, age-adjusted gun death rate per 100,000.
I got you. So thank you. Do you further yield?
Yes.
So what you're looking at is total per capita, not necessarily year over year change, but you highlighted
This does not have year-over-year change.
It leads to my question, which is, in the last 12 months, gun laws in the state have not changed, yet we have seen skyrocketing violent crime. And you're equating gun law changes, or the guns everywhere, as the previous senator said, with the change in violent crime. What do you equate the violent crime change to in the last 12 months in Atlanta?
I don't know. What I'm saying is, I didn't say anything about that. I said that since 2014, in the first 3 years after that bill, it went up 35%, and now it's up 45% since that time. That's what I said. So I said more guns are not saving more lives. And we've loosened, I've given, oh my God, I've lost count of the number of speeches like this I've given in this chamber. So I actually disagree with the premise of your question that we haven't loosened gun laws. We continue to loosen them. They continue to make no sense, and we continue to have more people die.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
The premise of my question is that violent crime right outside of this building has skyrocketed over the last 12 to 24 months. Do you agree with that?
It depends on what type of violent crime you're talking about.
Let's start with murder.
I don't have the figures in front of me. I do think murder is up in Atlanta this year and maybe last year.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
And if gun laws lead to that, yet we have not changed the gun laws, I am curious what you equivocate and assign the rise in murder in Atlanta to if the gun laws have not changed in the last 24 months.
The important thing to note, Senator, is that the more guns lead to more deaths. So when I hear the senator from the 31st say, oh, and then we've got these scenes outside, and you know what I think? I think that's because you made the laws that way in general. That's because we have no laws around guns, so everyone freaking has one.
Do you further yield?
Yes.
I come from the state of Illinois and went to school in the city of Chicago.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with what the gun laws are in the city of Chicago?
Yes, and that's exactly why I pointed out that Georgia, guns procured in Georgia show up in other states all the time that have stronger gun laws. It is our fault. It is our fault and the fault of states like ours with asinine gun policy why the murder rate is that bad in Chicago. I see my time has expired.
Thank you, Senator.
I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 53rd to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to simplify this for you. I'm going to Chickamauga this for you. Now, I have several vehicles at my house, and I have realized that the vehicle doesn't have the accident. It's the person driving the vehicle that has the accident. And in my house, I have lots of guns. And my son is a gun fanatic, by the way. He can identify a gun, vehicle, airplane, like that. He's just a real boy, if you know what I mean. So, not one of my guns has shot anybody, killed anybody, has been used in a bad situation because of our ability to train, to prepare, to keep safe those guns. And not a single gun that I know has ever killed anybody, shot anybody, injured anybody. It's the person behind the gun, it's not the gun. And gun laws are only for law-abiding citizens. That's the only ones. Because the criminal person, the bad guy, does not abide by laws. That could be a big surprise for many of you, because it's the truth. And I want to end by just thanking all the people working on this issue. The National Rifle Association with Wayne LaPierre and Raymond White, and the Georgia Carry, now called the 2A Association, for their leadership as well, with Ron Mahoney and Stephen Lofton. And all of you that work to make sure that we keep our Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, for each and every one of us. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 28th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. While y'all are sitting in your seats, I just want you to ask yourselves, what would a Ukrainian citizen say about these stats about gun deaths? Ask yourselves, what would a Ukrainian citizen say about their right to take up and bear arms? You ask that before you hit your button today. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm always surprised by the pro-law enforcement people that come just falling out of the sky when it's convenient. It's perplexing, and I hope at some point, if I continue to be reelected, at some point I'll understand the chemistry. But one thing I do know, and I agree with the senator when she said that 5,200 individuals were denied the right to carry a permit in the state of Georgia, based on the report she received from the Superior Courts. And if the senator from the 31st legislation passes, those 5,200 individuals, if they go to a retail store and they attempt to purchase a firearm, they will once again be denied, because this legislation does not prevent those retailers from running background checks through GCIC and NCIC so that they get the information from the state law enforcement community and the federal law enforcement community. And as a father who grew up in a home with 2 young kids that I was responsible for by myself, I will admit that there were firearms in my home. And I will admit that my children saw firearms. And I will admit that I raised my children to treat firearms like a venomous snake. They did not touch them. They did not touch mine. When they got old enough, I went out and bought each one of them a BB gun. I bought them safety glasses, and I bought them targets. And I raised my children how to deal with firearms. We read the articles about children dying in firearm deaths, and the responsible party of that is not a gun manufacturer, it's not a retail seller, but it's a mother and a father who did not appreciate the danger of a weapon that they left in control of children who had absolutely no training. And sadly, these children's lives ended. And sadly, to be the mean guy that I am, I hope every parent is prosecuted. They sacrificed their child for their irresponsibility. And I heard someone talk about the bloody trail. The bloody trail caused by gun deaths. Let me tell you where that bloody trail leads. That bloody trail leads to the feet of those who protect criminals. It leads to those who promotes the legalization of more drugs, including marijuana. It leads to the feet of those elected officials who ignore victims' rights and who support releasing violent individuals from prison. If you want to look at stats, look at the federal and state prison stats where they spoke to those incarcerated, and you will find out that a tremendous amount of them that used firearms in their crimes did not obtain these firearms by going into the local gun store, doing the background check, and getting them. So if you want to bring peace to your community, especially Atlanta, where criminals are coddled and treated as if they're victims, these individuals that the senator spoke about, this gentleman from England who was hit by a stray bullet, I promise you that there's a very, very good chance this was not some some citizen who legally owned a firearm who decided to stand out in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, and fire rounds indiscriminately around the city. If we're going to talk about something from this well as important as firearms in the Second Amendment, let's be honest about it. Let's don't try to come up with all these, these ideas that we try to twist and turn to fit our narrative. Guns kill people when they're in the hands of irresponsible people and criminals. I can testify today 100% that my firearms are secure at home. And I checked this weekend, and I'm proud to report that my firearms have not shot at or into anybody. They are fine because they are owned by a responsible gun owner who passes a background check. The last gun I purchased, I had to wait, and I was fine doing that because I know the system works. And what the senator from the 31st is doing is removing a simple piece of paper. And please, in the future, when you reference my profession, do me a favor and go by and ask me a question or ask one of my brothers and sisters who do the job what their opinion is. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the pro tem to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe if we stay here all day arguing back and forth, we're going to change anybody's hearts or minds. Some say this is a bad time to expand gun rights. I say it's a good time to protect our constitutional rights. It seems our constitutional rights are always under siege, under attack, and that should not be the case. I'd like to thank the senator from the 31st for bringing this measure, and thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, my colleagues in the Senate. We've heard an awful lot this morning, now it's this afternoon, about good guys and bad guys. Now, I think about the case that the leader mentioned, the leader of the Democratic Party, about the 4-year-old in DeKalb County who was hit by a stray bullet while sitting in church on New Year's Day, sitting next to his mom. Now that was a result of celebratory fire. So the person who shot that bullet into the air, is that a good guy or a bad guy or just a guy? I happen to think that's probably just a guy who didn't know what happens to that bullet after it's shot into the sky. I don't think we can get away with calling that person a bad guy until we in this body and in this government have taken full responsibility to make sure that people receive the proper training to possess or carry this dangerous weapon. And my very first bill that I filed when I got elected to this chamber was a repeal of the campus carry legislation. When I was listening to a news story about this bill, one of the students kind of disagreed that we should repeal that legislation, but this young person said, but if we're going to carry guns on campuses, then maybe we should at least be required to have some training. So that got me thinking, and I started having conversations with legislators, with senators around this chamber, and you know what? I found a lot of support for the idea of requiring training for people who want to carry a firearm. And I started drafting legislation, and as I talked to various Republicans in this chamber, they said, well, what about this and what about that? So I began to write in compromises into the legislation, and I was ready to file that bill this session. I was excited about it. But when I went back to those people that had supported me, they said they couldn't support me anymore because of this bill. Because we were taking away the permitting, so how could we require training? And all that support for that effort that I had worked for at least a year on just fizzled away. Now, we haven't always been this way about gun laws. I pointed out earlier this morning that in 2010, this body actually voted to make licensing stronger. Before 2010, I think this is something that most people don't know. Before 2010, you could open carry a long gun or a handgun without a license. But that changed in 2010 when this body passed a law that said now you have to have a license to open carry a handgun. That was 12 years ago. A lot has changed in 12 years, and it's not because guns have gotten safer. If we had enacted training 12 years ago, then maybe guns would have gotten safer, but we've done nothing. After the Parkland shooting, I went and spoke to a group of high schoolers. And you can imagine they were upset. They were scared. They have seen so many of these shootings. Sandy Hook, Parkland, Orlando, shootings in Walmart, shootings in grocery stores. They didn't feel safe. This is the generation that began to have to do armed intruder drills in school, and those drills in themselves were traumatic. And what they said to me is, why aren't the lawmakers doing more instead of less? So this morning I ask you that same question. Why are we not doing more? Why are we not standing up here talking about enacting training for people who want to carry a gun? Why are we not doing more? Why are we doing less? Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. The person that fires that gun in the air recklessly like that is the bad guy. The person that takes a gun and threatens somebody else with it is the bad guy. The person that threatens their spouse with a weapon is the bad guy. The person that walks into a school with a gun, that's the bad guy. The good guy is the person that gets in line and waits months to get a permit to carry a weapon in our state. The good person on the amendment is the person that tries to decide whether or not the individual they're giving a weapon to is going to use it in the wrong way. That good person weighs the law. A good person obeys the law. There's been a lot of talk about gun violence, a lot of talk about bad guys and good guys. Let's get back to what this bill actually does. This bill doesn't change who can possess a firearm in our state. The bill doesn't change where you can take a gun in our state. All this bill does is says that the good guy doesn't have to get in line and ask for permission to get a permission slip from the state to have a weapon. As I was trying to ask questions earlier, my point was this. Time's better just to get on and say it, I guess. Police can't stop somebody under the suspicion that you may or may not have a concealed carry permit. They can't go out there and say, you don't have a permit, therefore I can stop you. They can stop you if they have the right suspicion that says you can't legally possess a gun. If you've had involuntary hospitalization, if you've committed these felonies, if you've done the things that current law says you can't possess a firearm, they can stop you for those reasons, and they can arrest you if you actually have a gun. It gets back to the point of what is the purpose of the permit. And yes, we've talked about this since I've been in the legislature. We talked about this issue for some time, but I think the pandemic especially exposed the issue with the permitting process, delays we had in our probate court, folks waiting, getting in line, trying to have the right paperwork so they can have the permission slip to have a gun in our state. And I think now is the time to eliminate that process. Getting back to the amendment itself, if you look at the amendment, I want to go back to what I was asking the senator from the 42nd about, these exceptions. So how are you to decide whether or not you under this amendment have to go and get a federal dealer to do a federal background check for you? How are you to decide whether or not you should have to do that when you give a gun to someone else, when you transfer a weapon to somebody else? Well, grandparents are mentioned in line 43 of the amendment. So grandmother wants to give her grandchild a gun. She wants to pass down, such as in my family, her husband's gun to his grandson. The burden is on her. She doesn't have to go and ask permission in advance from the state. The police aren't coming out to oversee this process. She, the good guy, has to decide whether or not the law applies to her. You look at the amendment, it says, if the transferor, grandma, has no reason to believe the transferee, grandson, will use or intends to use a firearm in a crime or is prohibited from receiving or possessing firearms in the state or federal law. We see a similar standard on line 56 and on line 64 of the amendment. It goes down to, there's a transferor, the person given the gun, the good guy, wanting to follow the law, have reason to believe the person they're giving it to may be the bad guy. This exposes the issue with the current permitting process in itself. The good guys will follow the law. The good guys will go through the process and try to make sure all their T's are crossed, their I's are dotted. The good guy has their rights infringed upon, while the bad guy doesn't care what the law is because the bad guy is not following the law to start with. Earlier there was reference to voting, and someone asked a question comparing the Second Amendment to the amendments that deal with voting. I think there is a comparison. I'll close with this quote from Theodore Roosevelt. "A vote is like a rifle. Its usefulness depends upon the character of the user." Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 37th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I'm a firm believer and a strict constructionist in the Constitution of the United States and the guarantees to the people of the United States in the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. I would be willing to bet you today that 99% of the people in Ukraine would give anything that they have to have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield well.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 54th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brothers and sisters, colleagues, I know many of you know my story and my background and where I came from, but raised under a father who was a World War II baby who could tell me the stories about living here in Atlanta in 1941 and 42 and how scary the blackout drills were. Because all they had at home, like most homes back in that time, was a radio. And if they had not heard the radio, then they'd not known the news if it was a drill or if Atlanta was under attack during World War II. And how terrifying it was. And from that, and the understanding of those who are going off to war, and the value of freedom that every soldier has to put their life on the line for. And a soldier in the infantry battalion of which I served in the 1st 504th Infantry 82nd, we know the value of freedom. I also know that I stood beside my brothers of every race, every creed, every national origin. I even served next to, and people don't even really realize this, but I served next to a gentleman from Nicaragua, and this was in the 80s, when we were at odds with Nicaragua. And he was not even an American citizen, but there he was serving in the 1st 504th Infantry of the 82nd Airborne Division. Because of one thing, the foundational principles of freedom that is so much discussed at the birth of this nation. I spent a lifetime pursuing and establishing those rights, or helping others to establish themselves in the foundational principles of freedom. In essence, as a juvenile probation officer for 30 years, that's in essence what I was doing with kids, was teaching them the value and understanding of personal responsibility. I said it a million times throughout my 30-year careers. Let your childhood want to go and reach forward and grab hold of your adulthood need to, because you're transitioning between two worlds, from the world of want to the world of hope. And the difference in those two is your want will leave you bitter, angry, and mad, but it's only your hope that compels you forward. The same as when I was a soldier in the 1st 504th Infantry, it was my want that said, no, I think I'll stay right here in this foxhole, as my sergeant was saying to charge forward. It was only my hope that got me out of that foxhole and charged forward. Those principles of freedom that I spent a lifetime establishing and teaching young men and women about as a juvenile probation officer, those are for all men. The same all men that I stood shoulder to shoulder with in the infantry battalion. as I said, of every race, every creed, every national origin. We stood together as brothers in a defense of something much larger than ourselves. The Second Amendment is such a fundamental, foundational principle of freedom. And this really breaks down in my view of this. It's really just between a rural and urban consideration. People in urban areas of our state take for granted that I can call the police and within 5 minutes they're here and answering the call. But those of us in rural Georgia realize that that's not always the case. And I tell you, when I was a young man with my children were little, one such time that happened to me, we always would go camping, and I'd love to take my family and show them places that they'd never seen. We go to all places, and I will tell you, Georgia has the best state parks in the country. We visited all the state parks from all regions of the state. But one time we would also go primitive camping, where you had no power, no electricity, no running water. You just camped primitive in a tent. And one such time was off the Yellow River in East Georgia. And my wife and I are setting up the camp, and I just so happened to be wearing shorts and hiking boots and a shirt that covered my waistline. And just at dusk, right at dark, as we're trying to get the tent up before it turns dark, these four gentlemen come, I say gentlemen respectively, come walking out of the woods into our camping area. And I realized real quick from my background and training that they were terribly high on something. And they were literally asking a lot of questions and acting very suspicious. And so it's just me, my wife, and our two kids out in the middle of no man's land. And the fact that I could just inadvertently pull my shirt up to reach back to my back pocket to let them see that I had my pistol on my belt. Their tone changed. And I look back at that moment in time thinking, what if I had been a 20-something-year-old who could not afford $80 for a carry permit? And I was out there with my family, but I couldn't afford the cost to protect my own family. And being a law-abiding citizen, I wouldn't have carried because I couldn't afford to get the permit. What would have been the outcome that day? What would have been the outcome that day? Would those four men come back into my camp in the middle of the night, knowing all they had to do was take me out, and they would have free reign with my family? Freedom is a responsibility. I'm a second signer on this bill because I believe in the fundamental rights, and the Second Amendment is such a fundamental right of our freedom, the right to self-defense. And if we do not have the right to self-defense, then none of our other rights ever matter. Mr. President, I will yield the well and ask for everybody's favorable consent of this.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 5th to speak to the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, come over here to mention, with due respect, a couple of my colleagues mentioned Ukraine. I'm not sure how many of you got a call, text message, or email about Ukraine. I did. The text message, phone calls, and email. There are people right now in Georgia, their families in Ukraine. They reach out to me because, as you know, I represent one of the diverse state Senate districts in Georgia. So I told them, I'm praying for you. I don't know what I can do, but I'm going to forward it to the federal elected official, to our U.S. Senator, so they can probably help you. And that's exactly what I did. The reason they asked me, can you go and speak? I said, let me think about it. I didn't know what to say. But anyway, I even read on AGC, then that one lady mentioned they had a rally in Atlanta. They say, nobody's helping us. But that's not true. I want to explain it to that women that interviewed AGC know we are there to help you. United States is going to help the people of Ukraine, and we stand with you. And one more thing, a lot of folks, some of folks, they said that, before you push a button or whoever, we do respect that, think about the Ukrainian. You know what? What I see in television, all the tanks, on the armor, everything coming in, I don't think the simple gun is going to stop that. Simple gun will not going to stop what is going on in Ukraine. And I just want to mention that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Does any of the senator wish to speak for or against the measure? The chair recognizes the senator from the 31st to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, everybody, for the debate. So I do want to say, and I don't want to repeat unnecessarily what's already been rebutted, but firing bullets into the sky are only done by bad guys. I saw that at a young age in Doraville when gang members thought it was cute and clever to shoot bullets celebrating New Year's and everything else, and those bullets coming into houses and homes where people live. So where I come from, those are bad guys. I know there's a lot of talk about CDC studies, this and that, so I'm going to share one CDC study with you all. And as we all know, raw data, absent a proper statistical analysis taken into account, can always be misleading. In 2013, the US CDC, in conjunction with the Institute of Medicine, the National Research Council, studied this issue. The purpose of the research was to develop a proposed public health research agenda to improve the knowledge of the causes of gun violence, the interventions that prevent gun violence, and strategies to minimize the public health burden of gun violence. That research was published in a paper entitled Priorities for a Public Health Research Agenda to Reduce the Threat of Firearm-Related Violence. In their paper, they plainly stated, quote, "The National Research Council found no persuasive evidence of available studies that patches the right to carry laws decrease or even increase violent crime." So if you're out there and you're saying that the CDC has said this and that, I'd like to see what your facts are. Secondly, talk about other states just briefly. I'm going to use Illinois. Illinois seems to be a state people sometimes forget because we're down here in the South. But studies have shown, and this is data from the state of Illinois, studies have shown that individuals who wish to legally carry a firearm are less likely to use the gun to commit the crime. For example, from 2014 to 2018, the state of Illinois had an average over 176,000 active permits. Over that same period, no one was convicted of committing a crime with their permitted concealed handgun. At that time, 5 individuals faced charges, with 4 of them claiming to have used their guns in self-defense. Thirdly, I know there's a lot of discussion around the 5,000 licenses, and I thank the senator from the 17th for his comments, but just to be clear, Georgia is a shall-issue state. All persons who are prohibited must be issued a carry license if requested. And this bill only allows law-abiding citizens who have qualified for a license to carry without the burden of applying and paying for a license. Fourth, this debate is all it is, whether you can want to disagree or not. It is about law-abiding citizens versus the criminals. And I've not heard a single mention or merit to this bill discussed from the other side. All I've heard is about voting, abortion, all kinds of other issues, but not one single merit of policy that refutes what this bill is doing. And finally, we like to throw around the word extremists. And, in some places, yes, it's appropriate and it's warranted. But if you're going to tell young moms and families in the suburbs of Atlanta or the city of Atlanta or in West Georgia or in Valdosta or in Augusta or Savannah and areas in between that they're extremists because they want to protect their families in this day and age, maybe you need to rethink your priorities of what we're doing for Georgia families in this capital. Mr. President, I asked that the Senate vote red on the amendment, and I asked for favorable consideration of Senate Bill 319. Thank you.
All right, we're first going to take up Amendment Number 1, the adoption of Amendment Number 1. Is there objection to adoption of Amendment Number 1? There is objection. All those in favor of adoption of Amendment Number 1, vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the adoption of the amendment, the yeas are 22, the nays are 34, and the amendment has failed. We now take up the underlying measure. Is there objection to agreeing the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? The chair hears none, and the main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill? All those in favor vote yea. Opposed, nay. The Secretary will unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 34, the nays are 22. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Secretary, can you please read a message from the House?
Mr. President, the following message was received from the House through Mr. Riley, the clerk thereof. Mr. President, the House insists on its position in substituting the following bill of the Senate, Senate Bill 120, by Senators Tibbins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 18 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to Solicitors General of State Courts so as to provide for the honorary office of Solicitor General and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Senate Rule 7-1.10B, I give notice that at the appropriate time, I intend to move that the Senate consider House action on Senate Bill 120.
Mr. Secretary, can you please read the caption?
Senate Bill 120, a bill by Senators Tippins of the 37th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 3 of Chapter 18 of Title 15 of the OCGA relating to Solicitors General of State Courts so as to provide for the honorary office of Solicitor General Emeritus, to provide for qualifications, to provide for certificate, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
The majority leader has given notice that he intends to move on the Senate consideration on House action on SB 120. The appropriate time is the next legislative day. Chair continues to recognize the majority leader for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, 1 March 2022.
Mr. Secretary, do you have any announcements?
The Rules Committee will meet upon adjournment today in 4:50. The Finance Committee will meet in 4:50 at 1 p.m. today. The Science and Technology Committee will meet in 3:10 of the CLOB at 1 p.m. today. The Judiciary Committee will meet in 3:07 of the CLOB at 2 p.m. today. The Education and Youth Committee will meet in 3:07 of the CLOB at 3 p.m. today. All other committee meetings have been canceled. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Does any senator wish to make an announcement? The chair sees none. The majority leader has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until Tuesday, March 1st, 2022 at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes actually have it today. The Senate stands adjourned.